it's a pleasure to be with you to talk about these subjects. I'll just say a couple of things about that Cyber Safety for Families resource. It is a CD that contains handouts that you can use. It contains a PowerPoint presentation. This was the idea behind it. What can we give to a local church so that they can conduct cyber safety training if they don't have a so-called expert? And this is what we came up with. And my name's on the cover, but certainly most of the work that went into it is in the production and the PowerPoints, the pictures, the illustrations, and all those things that they took care of. And it really turned out much better than what I sent them. It's much better than that. So I hope you will take advantage of that as a resource. The first thing I want to talk about is again, how I got into this. In my paying job, the one that pays the bills, I'm Chief Information Officer for Currituck County Schools in North Carolina. So I'm the tech guy. And as I hope doesn't always happen when you leave town, when I always leave town, there's a problem. One of the messages I got from my network engineer a while ago was one of the core switches had gone down and the school was out most of the day. And the other was from a member of the cabinet that said our school superintendent announced this morning she was resigning. So who knows? You go out of town and you never know what's going to happen. But that part of myself, the work with technology from back when I was in the Navy and on nuclear submarines, to working in electronics and teaching electronics and then coming up through the public school system, that's what really fostered that side of who I am, a techie kind of guy. Well, I also grew up in the United Methodist Church. As mentioned, my father was a Methodist minister and retired and then went back as a part-time appointment like many do. Passed away a few years ago, but I've been active in the United Methodist Church since I was a kid, and so it seemed a logical marriage of interest. And the church where I serve, Pillmore Memorial United Methodist Church in Currituck, the pastor there was on the state sexual ethics response team and asked me if I would join them, and I did, and that's kind of how it got started. I'll have to look behind me here for these things. There we go. Okay. So when I was thinking about this kind of work, this kind of cyber safety work, and what it means and why it's important for the church, and I think it's important for the church, this is the scripture that came to me from John 21. And you know this story. This is where Christ has appeared to the disciples after his resurrection, and he comes to Peter and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Well, then feed my sheep." And he asked him again, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Then tend my sheep." And he asked him a third time. And one of the great things about that scripture for me is that lesson that even though Peter denied him 3 times, Christ gave him 3 times to reaffirm his love for him. That's comforting for me. The other thing is that commandment to tend my sheep, I think that kind of goes through the ages. I think that's something that applies to us now just like it did to Peter and the apostles and the early church. So what does that mean to tend the sheep? Well, obviously it still means some of the same things. It means caring for the poor. It means feeding the hungry. It means giving clothes to those who don't have sufficient clothes and housing to those who are homeless. All those things still apply. But in this 21st century, I think there's some things we have to add to the list. And I think cyber safety is one of them. So I had this idea for 21st century sheep, and I talked to my wife because she can draw. Actually, everybody in my family is an artist except me. And so my wife sketched out this little sheep. I said, "I want a little cute thing." And then I talked to my son who was going through technical school, and I said, "Can you use Photoshop and superimpose a circuit in there?" And so he did that. So that's kind of a family project there. But it represents what I think the church, one of the things that the church should be about, and that's caring for the 21st century sheep. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to structure this into 3 or 4 parts. One, kind of where are we now? What's really good going on, and then what are some things that we need to be careful of, and what are some strategies we can use. And I won't go into a lot of really technical cyber safety strategies. They'll be in the session tomorrow. But just as a quick overview, where are we now? A lot of these statistics that I'm going to share with you are from Pew Internet Research. And if you're looking for documentation on use of cell phones or use of internet or sexting or those kinds of things, Pew Internet's a great resource, and they're very well respected. But what you can see is that in the younger ages there, over 90% are online. Even when you get up above 65, over 40% of the people are online. Nationwide, I think it's around 79 or 80%. So we're not talking about just a few little people out there, a few early adopters who are online and involved with this technology and doing these things. We're talking about most of the people. Now, certainly based on the demographics of the congregation or the audience that you serve, that may be a little different, but it's still something that's big enough, it's a big enough part of our lives that I feel like the church needs to get involved with it. And it's certainly, if history is any indication, it's not something that's going to fizzle out. It was interesting, I'll jump ahead here just a minute. I was reading an article, a blog post from about 3 years ago on Facebook. And the author of this blog post was saying, yeah, Facebook is real popular now, but it won't last long. So we try not to make too many predictions in this business. Here's one for you. 64% of online Americans have used the web for spiritual or religious purposes. I actually had conversations with a pastor in Louisiana who said who they make extensive use of Facebook and web pages and MySpace and all that. And she said she's had people come into her front door and she thinks it's the first contact they've had with the church, but it's not. They've been on the website, they've listened to her sermons online, that can be a powerful resource to put out there. So there's a lot of good going on with the internet and these online resources. There's also a lot of charity going on. Some of you, anybody familiar with the site freerice.com? Okay, what it does is this international aid organization has put this site up, and you go in and you answer questions and basically play little games, and advertisers are on that site, and the advertisers have agreed to give money to charity for every click on that site. So it's, again, there are good ways to use these technologies, and I think we're going to see more and more of those as time goes on. In fact, one that was just brought to my attention yesterday in a session that we had here on social media was Jumo.com. Here's the idea behind Jumo. They find worthwhile projects, and they find people with the skills and resources and time necessary for those projects, and they try to put them together. You know, that the internet, the World Wide Web, is probably the best way in the world to do that. I can imagine before the web somebody with a big bulletin board and projects and names of people and talking on the phone and trying to match. But here on the internet, it's all done instantly. Lots of good things going on. Here's an interesting statistic. Can you see that? 17% of online daters have turned online dates into long-term relationships or marriage. How many of you know someone who has married someone who they met online? Look at that. Turn around and look. That's incredible. Okay? I didn't even think it'd be that high. That's wonderful. But you know what's another interesting statistic? And this was from a book called Microtrends. It was by Mark Penn. He said this number, this 17%, is exactly the same as the percentage of people who say they met in church and ended up married. Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And whereas we used to think somebody, they met online and so there's something kind of weird or geeky or whatever, that's not the case anymore. Okay? There are lots of good opportunities to meet online. Someone shared in our social media session yesterday, and forgive me if I don't get the facts exactly right, but she just married this couple that are in their 60s, I think, and they met online in an online support group when both of their spouses were dealing with a tragic disease. They met then, this was several years ago. They continued the online relationship and have since got married. A wonderful resource for bringing people together. One of the other things that's new and getting big and you hear a lot about is cloud computing. And very, very basically, let me just give you an idea of what that is. Does anybody use Gmail? Okay, pretty good number of folks. That's Google's mail. It's free. It's like a 7.5 gig mailbox. It's huge. That's cloud computing because you're not maintaining that mail server. In fact, in our school system, we recently migrated to Google applications where they have Gmail and Google Documents, so you don't have to have Microsoft Word anymore. They have Google Spreadsheets, so you don't have to have Excel. And we're estimating that it's going to save us over the next few years about $30,000. And that's even if, that's on the low side of that. Because we're using these resources that are out in the web somewhere in these big data centers that Google and those other companies maintain. Maybe something to think about. I don't know how many conferences are doing that, who've outsourced those things, but it's new and it's a way to improve efficiency, because instead of everybody maintaining their own servers and things, you share them. All right, another thing that's new, relatively new, are location-based services. Have you heard about these? These are services that know where you are because of these little things. All right? Your cell phone has GPS in it, so it knows where you are. So what I did when I came here this morning, or this afternoon, I came back, I started up Foursquare, which is one of these services, and it's a service that's grown 3,400% in the last year. And here's another way that this technology gets used. When I was talking about this in the social media session yesterday, I didn't remember that number. But someone in the crowd, in the group, had a smartphone, they Googled it, they said, oh, that was 3,400%. Okay? And over 6 million users. So what I did is I pulled out my device and I said, start Foursquare. And it looks at GPS and tries to tell me where I am. It didn't know if I was here or at the place across the street or the subway, but it listed all the places, and First United Methodist Church was one. So I clicked the button and said, check in here. When I check in here, then it also tells me everybody else who's checked in here. Okay? Now we got some worries, don't we? Okay. And those are things we're going to have to balance, but it's an interesting tool, and I have just gotten started with it. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep up with it because I have some of those feelings about it too. But Foursquare is not the only one. Gowalla is another. Google Latitude lets people that you agree to put on the list, lets them track you in real time from your GPS signal. Facebook Connect just got a lot of publicity over their new location-based product. But it's something that perhaps there are parents out there who might want to know about this. Is my child broadcasting to a small group of friends or to the world where she is all the time? And is that a good idea? So it's about us having an understanding and a knowledge enough that we can start those conversations so that parents can start those conversations with their children. Again, I'm not sure I'm going to stick with it, but it's been fun so far. I keep pointing back there when the computer's back here. So. All right. And then there's the elephant in the room, Facebook. How many have a Facebook account? I bet we're between 85 and 90%. Okay. It's funny, when we did this a few years ago and asked this question of similar populations, you get just a few hands going up. But Facebook is one example of social media, and it is definitely the most popular social networking tool in the world. And when you look at those numbers, Facebook has 500 million users, and that's active users. That's what they classify as active users, over 500 million. There are more people on Facebook than there are in the United States. Okay? Now, I was talking to a group of middle school students a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about internet safety and the need to be careful about what you post online. And I asked these kids, now these are 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kids, and I talked to them in grade level groups, but in every group, the numbers were about the same. Ask them how many had a Facebook page. Probably 98%. Even those who weren't really old enough to have them, they still had them. And then I went on to tell them how many people are on Facebook, 500 million. And then I asked, do you think they're all nice people? And they got it. They said, no, they're not all nice people. That's right. So you got to start talking about safety strategies with social networking. But I also heard some great stories in our session yesterday, and for those who were in that, I apologize for repeating, but you gave me some great ideas. One of the pastors said they have a Facebook page for their church, and I would encourage you to do that if you don't have one yet. And what they find is on Sunday afternoon after the sermon, they start seeing comments about the sermon. Maybe you got to have a thick skin to do that. I don't know. Maybe they're not all good. But start posting those comments or asking questions. Okay? Now think about that for a minute. Normally, and I'm a lay speaker, so I get to preach the Sunday after Easter and the Sunday after Christmas every year. And you know it's true, don't you? So, and I don't blame you. So when you're standing outside the front of the church and you're shaking hands as they go out, you know, good sermon, I like that, I like this point or that point. But think about taking that conversation and stretching it out through the week to all the members of your congregation. So not only can they make comments to you or ask questions, but you can also respond and the other people in the church see those comments and answers. I mean, sure, if it's something personal, you take it offline. But you can extend that discussion on through the week of that sermon. That can be a powerful tool. Another big thing. The pictures, I don't know if they showed up very well, but it says the average age of a computer video game user is 33. That surprised me. However, let me ask this. How many of you ever play computer games? All right. Did you guys include solitaire? If I include solitaire, what does the number go to? A little higher? Okay. All right, there are lots of different computer games out there, and they range from the very simple solitaire that you play on your computer and no one else interacts to these massively multiplayer online games that we'll talk about in a few minutes. We'll talk about them right now. All right, MMORPGs, they're called. Massively multiplayer online games. So what that means is, and I've never gotten into these, but both my boys did, and this is an aside, our boys, my wife and I, they're 26 and 23, and they lived with us until about 2 years ago when we finally moved them out. Well, my oldest son is a school teacher, and they don't make a lot of money in North Carolina. But we had an extra lot next to us, and our school, one of the projects is they build a house, the carpentry kids build a house to raffle off. So he was able to get that at a pretty decent price, and so we said, okay, well, you can put it on the lot if you take your brother with you. So that's been the deal. So we got the room over the garage back, but before they left, it was like a dorm room almost, and there would be 2 big TVs and 4 screens, and they'd be up there playing, and I'd ask them who they were playing with, and they could tell me sometimes, well, I'm playing with my cousin Josh or whatever. Sometimes I don't know. These people are from around the world. And they log into the game, and they get in, and they play together, and they cooperate together. They talk to one another. They've got mics and earpieces. They can text one another. And so these games are not just, I'm sitting at my computer wasting time playing solitaire. These are social games. And in fact, the 3 most popular games from the first half of last year were the new Mario for the Wii, and that was, that's rated, I think, E for everyone. But the other 2 were Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Battlefield. And both of those are games that are rated mature. So do you know, and do parents know when they buy games, are they looking for those ratings? And do they understand when they're playing those games, those kids could be connecting with people from around the world? Who knows what machinima is? Ever heard that term, machinima? Machine cinema, okay? And what these kids are doing, and they're not all kids, but most people are kids to me now, but what these kids are doing is they're going into these online games, these games that have virtual worlds in them, right? Where you can run down the street, you can go into the store, you can do all these things. And what they do is they work together to set up scenes, record it on the computer, and then go back and edit it together. This one, The Trash Master, has just come out. I think it's like an 80-minute movie made completely from video game footage. So what they're doing is they're taking tools that were originally designed for one purpose, and they're using them for another purpose. And they're being creative with it. And maybe we could take a lesson from that to see how we can be creative with some of these tools to use them for the work of the church. The most popular game systems right now, I've tried to list them there, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and those things. All of those have internet access. So when we talk about cyber safety and we talk about rules for online safety, we're not just talking about sitting down in front of a computer, a desktop, or a laptop. We're also talking about these games. I was doing a presentation in Wilmington, North Carolina, for a group there, and I was talking about games and internet access. And one of the parents had told me, yeah, they've got real tight controls on their computer, and they know, when the kid's on and when they're not, and all this. And so she was feeling pretty comfortable. And then I started talking about games, and she said, I won't remember exactly which one it was, but I think it was the Xbox 360. She said, well, he's got an Xbox 360. I said, you know that's got internet access? I thought she was going to get up and leave right then. But she did make some notes, and she did decide she was going to go back and try to look into that to make sure that she was keeping her child safe. And this is a funny story. Last year, my boys gave me a PlayStation 3 because they were absolutely convinced that I needed to get into video games. The only one that I've gotten really into at all is Gran Turismo, where you're racing a car, because I can understand that. I don't do it very well, but I understand it. The other games I just have a lot of trouble with. So they gave us another game, Little Big World, and my wife and I are playing it, and it's just little cute stuff. You run around, you jump, you do puzzles and all. Well, somehow we had messed up, and we had gotten online. Okay, so we had gotten online so that other people could come and join. And I mean, we're new, we don't know what we're doing, and all of a sudden this new character pops onto the screen, and it's got wings, and we don't have wings, and it comes down and it grabs Beth's character and holds her back and won't let her do anything. And she's so frustrated. It's called griefing, where you get on and you give other people grief. And this person was just harassing us. We finally just had to unplug it and then call the boys over to say, how do we play this game without getting online? But that kind of interaction, I shouldn't admit that, should I? But that kind of interaction can take a range from the mildly annoying, which is what that was, to predators and harassment, okay? Because once you've opened that door, and you've opened that door to the world, basically, into your living room, or worse yet, into your kid's bedroom, then you don't have a lot of control over what comes in and out that door. The other thing that we need to make sure people understand is when we're talking about internet access, we're also talking about these things. Okay? When I was doing this presentation a couple of weeks ago in the middle school, I asked what % of you have cell phones? When actually what I should have asked is what % of your parents have cell phones that they're letting you use? But it was over 90%. Okay? And essentially all of those had texting plans. And then I said, what percentage of you have a phone, called a smartphone, or a phone that will allow internet access? And there were probably 30 to 40% of those that had phones that allowed internet access. Well, here's what scares me as a chief information officer of a school system. One of the things I'm responsible for is our internet filter. We are required by law to have an internet filter that protects children from pornography in order to qualify for federal funds. Plus, it's just a really great idea. But I'll tell you that no internet filter is perfect. The best I can do with that filter, they can still get around it. Anybody ever heard of proxy sites, proxy websites? Here's what, it's a whole category of sites, and their entire purpose is to get around internet filtering. If you want some information on these or a list of some, peacefire.org is one of the places that kind of coordinates a lot of this. And they make the case that these bypasses are important in places like China, where the government is filtering the internet and denying access, and actually, some reports of following up with people and arresting them based on their Google searches and that kind of stuff. So they make the case that it's important, and it probably is there. But if it's available to that dissident in China, it's available to Johnny in the 6th grade. So what Johnny does is he goes to, let's say, luckyduck.com, whatever the latest one is. I don't know if that's right or not. All right? And it gives him a box where he can type in his new address. I want to go to Facebook, or I want to go to MySpace, or I want to go to playboy.com, or whatever it is. And it redirects the traffic to that website. So on my filter, when I look at it, I see you went to luckyduck.com. Well, once I find out it's a proxy, I can block it, but I don't know. They pop up every single day. So even if you've got an internet filter, it's not going to be perfect. But back to this. There's nothing I can do about this. Okay? Kid walks into school, kid walks into your church, sitting on the back pew, surfing the internet. There's nothing you can do to block where they go if they're getting their internet access through their cell phone provider. Which leads me to a point we'll get back to in a few minutes. The technology isn't the only answer. Okay? Technology's reached into our entertainment media now. Most of you have probably heard of The Social Network, that movie about Facebook. Very good movie. I really enjoyed it. Anybody ever heard of the movie Catfish? Yeah? It's an independent documentary, and it looks at the issue of people online maybe misrepresenting themselves a little bit. And it, yeah, just a little. And it follows this guy and his friends from New York City who believe they're fans of this child prodigy artist out in the Midwest. And so they make a trip out to see, and the story unfolds. I would encourage you to watch it. It's really good. But what it does is it brings home that idea, that fact, that you can't always trust people or who they say they are online. There's also the movie The Craigslist Killer. You've heard about that, who used that online advertising to lure women into places where he could kill them. And then the center picture is a new movie that's coming out. I haven't seen it yet. It's been at a couple of film festivals. It's titled Trust. And it's being, I think, produced and directed by David Schwimmer, the Ross from Friends. And he just really felt compelled to address this issue of cyber predators and getting involved with people online and the damage that can lead to. And so he's put out this movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. But what we see is all of those things that we deal with and the kids deal with and adults deal with in real life, they become infused into our entertainment. There we go. Now, there are some people that say, maybe we've gone too far. Maybe we don't need to be tweeting and using Twitter in the sanctuary, although I have heard 2 different stories since I've been here of places where that's being used very effectively and building up communication in the church. Or maybe we shouldn't have Facebook accounts for our church or those other things, but lest you think that's going too far, I want to tell you about this fella here. This guy's a professor, and he decided, and he's an artist, and he decided he was going to take that merging of technology and art and humanity to another level, and he did this. He had a surgery to implant a camera on the back of his head, and it live streams, well, not live streams, it takes a snapshot every few seconds and puts it out on the web. That's the website there, 3rdi.me. It's not very compelling video. You're looking at the back of the cabinet, you're looking at some. So I think we could probably make the argument that, yeah, in some cases, some of us would say things have gone too far. But it doesn't mean that we have to throw all the technology out because of those kinds of situations. He does black it out when he goes to the gym. I guess that's privacy for the other people that are there. What? Can we go back one? There we go. there was an article written a couple years ago by Nicholas Carr, and the title of the article, I think it appeared in the New York Times, was, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" Because there are lots of folks that would say maybe it is. One of the things that we hear some in education circles now is we don't need to concentrate as much on the facts of, let's say history, for example, as we do the big concepts, and teach the kids how to get information themselves and discern what's good information and not. Because in the age of Google, those facts come like that. Having the background information to be able to interpret those facts and apply them is a whole other subject. But what Nicholas Carr says, and again, the article was, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And if you Google that, you can find the article online and read it. It's pretty interesting. If you want to find out the rest of the story, he went on to write this book, what the internet is doing to our brains, called The Shallows. And in this book, he makes the argument that now that so much of our reading and so much of our gathering information has gone online, we are losing the ability to read deeply and for extended periods of time. I think he's right. In my experience, that's true. And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to set aside time on a regular basis where I make sure I pick up a book or an extended article of some sort and just devote all of my attention to that, rather than the way my day normally goes, sitting in front of a computer, answering every email that pops up, getting the instant messages from the schools and trying to respond to those things, and answering the phone, and a day filled with distractions. Because brain science now is telling us that we are really not very good multitaskers. You know, for years we've said that this new generation of kids, they can multitask. Well, what they're saying now is, no, they're not really multitasking. They're just sequentially changing tasks very rapidly. And every time you do that, the brain has a reset and a kind of a reboot process to move to another issue, to another problem. So as you're doing that, you never have that time to really get deeply involved in an issue. And that's where the creativity and ingenuity comes from. I would encourage you to try that yourself. If you regularly read, let's say, the news online, see if you're really deep reading or if you're doing something called super skimming, because they're different. The other point that Nicholas Carr makes is the same point that I've heard made when I'm talking to people about spiritual disciplines, and that is the problem with distractions. That if we're going to practice meditation, we've got to find some way to minimize those distractions. And if we've got a world where as soon as we wake up in the morning, we turn on the TV, we turn on the computer, we check our email on the cell phone, we respond to the instant messages, and we tweet out what we're going to have for breakfast, then we've got a day that's filled with distractions. All right, if you like Twitter, let me tell you that here's another one. I've got a guy that works for me. He's one of my technicians, and he went to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. He said Twitter was the big thing there. There was all kinds of devices integrating Twitter. And one of the devices was a bathroom scale with Bluetooth capability. Okay? And the Bluetooth capability connects to your cell phone. So you stand on the scale and it tweets out to the world how much you weigh that day. It's not something I want to share with everybody, and I'm not sure you want to know. So there's one of the things that this technology can bring to us is distraction. And so we need to think about, what does that mean for spiritual development, for spiritual discipline, for meditation, for prayer? And how do we address that? How do we address that as a church without saying you need to throw all these things away so you can focus and still bring them in? To share the two stories that I heard with you about Twitter being used in the sanctuary during the sermon. One was today at lunch, sometime around lunch, and they were encouraging the folks to go ahead and tweet questions. If you have questions about the sermon or you have comments about it, go ahead and tweet them to the preacher during the sermon. He wasn't looking at them then, but he'd go back and look at them later and answer them. Said that the other thing that was coming out of that is some of the kids would be tweeting something or instant messaging or texting or whatever technology they were using, send it out to one of their friends who maybe wasn't at church to say, the preacher just said this. And it was turning out to be a type of an outreach. But the one that actually flabbergasted me yesterday was the church where the pastor is actually viewing the Twitter feed during the sermon and making adjustments on the fly if people have questions so he can clarify something or whatever. That would drive me nuts. Okay? And it would probably drive the congregation nuts too, because that wouldn't make any sense at all. But it's working for them. It's working in that church. It's got the young people energized and active in the service. So whatever works, I guess. Now for this stuff. Okay. I've talked to groups in various states and different organizations about internet pornography and the kinds of things that are online. But the most uncomfortable experience I had doing that was when I did that for the United Methodist Men's Group at my church. Because the statistics will tell me that, depending on what study you read, anywhere from 30 to 50% of those guys are dealing with this issue. And I'm standing there, and I'm not up on a big stage or whatever. I'm right down there at the breakfast table with them, and I'm talking about it. And it's uncomfortable, and it's hard. But that's probably what we need to do. I'll tell you how I addressed it with the middle school kids last week, a couple weeks ago. I said, we're going to talk about some yucky stuff, and we just have to do it because it's out there. And they understood, you know. Although I asked the principal to send something to all the parents beforehand and say, we're going to be talking about sexting, we're going to talk about internet pornography, and you're more than welcome to come and join us. Okay? And I think if we approach things that way, whether it's in a civic group or it's in our church, and we just say we're going to talk about these things because they're part of this world, and they're the kinds of things that we have to deal with. And I'm not just talking about the kids. You know, a lot of times we go, oh yeah, the kids are looking at this, and well, it's not just the kids, it's us. And there was a report out last year that said when they were asking, and this was particularly men who were looking at internet pornography, and the percentage, I don't remember what the time frame was, but the percentage was like 40 or 50%. And then they looked at the percentage of men who identified themselves as Christians, and what their percentage was, it was just about the same. It's not an issue that I think we can ignore. And I know we don't like to talk about sex in the church, but it's too big an issue for us to ignore, I think. And what we're talking about here is not your uncle's Playboy magazine. I used that line in a community presentation one time, and that's the only quote that got in the paper the next day. It's not your uncle's Playboy magazine. But it's not. I mean, it's pictures, it's video, it's perversion, it's everything that you could imagine and don't want to imagine, and it's available absolutely for free on the internet. In fact, over the past couple of years, the porn industry has actually seen declining revenues because there's so much available for free. And it's out there, and it's not protected. You don't have to have some kind of great age verification. You have to say, are you 18? Yep, click, you're in. And it's there. Now, when we talk about kids, we know that kids are curious. We were all curious when we were kids. We're still curious about things now. So it's not, I don't think it should shock us that a kid would search for a nude picture. Doesn't shock me. Okay? But the problem, one of the problems is when they find that nude picture, it's going to excite them. And what we often do is we don't acknowledge that. When we talk to kids about pornography on the internet, that's bad stuff. Stay away from that. It'll hurt you. It's bad for you, whatever. And what we maybe ought to do is acknowledge, yes, it may make you feel excited a little bit because it's new and it's something you haven't seen and you're curious about it. But it's really not good for you. It's like it's like when we talk to them about drinking. Maybe we say, yeah, you may feel a little lightheaded and it may make you laugh or something, but then you're going to get sick. And it's not good for you. I firmly believe that the more honest we can be up front with kids and adults on these issues, the better the message will be received. This is a publication that's put out by CovenantEyes.com. Anybody familiar with them? CovenantEyes.com. It's a great resource. It's a Christian-based organization, and they sell filtering software. But their message goes beyond that. And in fact, this document is Porn in the Pews, and it's a free download, and it's a great document for addressing these issues and gives a lot of good stats. And I would encourage you to maybe check that out as a good place to get started. We'll go back to, here's the table of contents for that. And I didn't have this in my handout, so let me just read it. So you want to open that can of worms is the first chapter. Okay? And that's something that you have to address. And I think you have to think about what's going to be well received in your congregation. There's another organization out there called XXX Church. Anybody ever seen them? XXXchurch.com. And it's a couple of guys who came together and said churches need to talk about porn. And they have programs that you can actually buy, the promotional materials, and one of them is Porn Sunday, and that's how you advertise it. Now, I can promise you that wouldn't go over very well in my church. Okay? That's not the way we need to address it there. But it does need to be addressed. The other chapters there just kind of lead you through some strategies and talk about some statistics and stuff. But that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Not is there a can of worms? Because the can of worms is there. It's whether or not we want to open it in the church. All right. Another concern about internet safety and being online and living online is identified in this article by Jeffrey Rosen in the New York Times. And he says, the web means the end of forgetting. The idea that well, maybe not quite that young, but the idea of what a kid does online is there forever. And that what they're doing, realizing it or not, they're building their digital portfolio. Which is one of the reasons we need to talk to them about, and to all of us about, don't put anything online you don't want everyone to see. Because once it's posted, you lose all control over it. Here's an example. We had an employee of the school system, and somebody sent in some pictures of this employee looked like drinking alcohol with students. Well, as we dug into it, they'd actually graduated. It was still may have been inappropriate, but it wasn't a violation of any of our policies. But she said, well, I had that, just my friends could see it, just 3 or 4 people could see it. Well, she recently underwent a separation. And either she didn't get her husband's access removed soon enough, or he just simply downloaded the photos when he did have access. Because once you put it out there, you don't have any control over it. Google has programs that basically crawl the internet and collect archives of all the web pages. And you may see that on Google sometimes when you search for something. If the page isn't available, it'll say, do you want to see an archive? Because it's cached it. So even something that you've removed from the web is still out there somewhere. Okay. And what Jeffrey Rosen says is before all this digital remembering, mistakes that people make in their teens could be more easily forgotten and more easily forgiven. But if they're always out there in front of us and in front of folks, we don't tend to let the bad things go as easily as we should. We tend to look back and say, well, look what you did at this point, and the consequences that can have on a person's life. There are some people who have suggested expiration dates on things that we post to social networking sites, that by default, anything that gets posted expires, goes away in some amount of time. Technology is available to do that, but I don't know that the will is there. Certainly Mark Zuckerberg's is not. He's He makes money by being open. Okay? But another reason for showing you this slide, I want to share with you a new survey that was just out from AVG, which is an antivirus software company. And this just came out last week when I saw it. But they surveyed some 2,000, 3,000 parents from several different countries, parents who had kids ages 2 to 5. And they asked some of the regular questions about, is your child able to do this? Is your child able to tie his shoes? And there were about 9% in that age group that could. Is your child able to swim alone? About 20%. Can your child ride a bike? About 43%. Then they asked some other questions. Is your child able to access smartphone applications? 19% said yes. My 2 to 5-year-old uses my smartphone and uses the applications. They asked, is your child able to operate a web browser? And 25% said yes. My 2 to 5-year-old is able to operate a web browser. They asked, can your child play a video game? And 58% said yes. So this technology is getting into the hands of the young very quickly. I've got a friend at work who has an iPhone and has purposefully installed little baby gaming apps, because there's thousands of apps out there, and that's the babysitter when the kid's in the car. Here, play with this while we go. And as long as she doesn't have internet access going and she's approved the apps, then that's probably a good thing. But it's getting down younger and younger and younger. Kind of shifting gears a little bit from online activities to just texting. 1/3 of teens say they have texted while driving, and I have to tell you, I want you to know how happy I was to get to the motel yesterday, because we got off the airplane, and I had booked that super shuttle thing, right? So I go and I get my ticket, and I take it out to the driver, and okay, jump in and we'll take you. Jumped in. First of all, it smelled like an ashtray, and I probably still smell like cigarette smoke. But then, half the way here, he's texting. And I see him look up for a second, down, up, down, up, down. Oh. I was so glad to get here. Because what studies tell us is that a person who's texting while driving is 23% more likely to get in an accident. Oprah did a big push on this recently, and it's something that we need to continue to talk to our kids about, and we need to talk to our parents about, because it's very, very dangerous. We had in North Carolina, the State Highway Patrol will come in and do presentations on teen safety and driving, and to hear him tell the stories of kids killed while texting and driving is tragic. And there are some movies and videos out there on that really bring that point home. This is another subject that's gotten a lot of coverage in the press lately. Cyberbullying. We all know what bullying is. Bullying is when I follow, or you follow me more likely, out onto the playground, push me around, take my lunch money. Right? I'm kind of a weakling, so I wouldn't be very successful at that line of work. But cyberbullying is taking that same kind of intimidation, harassment kinds of behaviors and taking it online. Now, the numbers that are here vary greatly depending on which study you look at and depending on how cyberbullying is defined. Because what we find is when we talk to kids about things that sometimes we would consider cyberbullying, they don't think of it that way. They think, oh, they're just being mean. And so they don't use the same language. We had that discussion in a group today too. They're not using the same language, but that just being mean, if it occurs over time, is bullying, is harassment, and can be cyberbullying. And one of the things we find is that sometimes people who are cyberbullying go further than face-to-face bullying. Because if I'm a bully, pretend like I'm a bully, and I'm going to pick on you, and every day when you come into school, I'm going to say something mean, I can see your reaction. I got what I wanted, I'm done. But if I'm doing it online, I don't get that feedback as a bully. And so I may continue to pile it on. I may post a video on YouTube and say, this is you doing something you shouldn't be doing. Or I may set up a fake Facebook account and put all kinds of mean comments and say it's your Facebook account. I actually got a call on that. This was a presentation I was doing in Edenton a Saturday morning, and I've already told you about the luck I have with things going wrong at work when I'm doing this. Well, I got a call during a break from my network engineer, so I figured I better take it. And he had just found out his daughter was 7th grade, and someone in that school had set up a fake Facebook account for her. They got her picture from somewhere, I don't know where, set up the page, said it was from her, and then started sending messages to boys in the school asking for nude pictures. Now, luckily, there were some folks who found out about it and they were able to shut it down pretty quickly, but think about the potential for that. Think about that as a harassing behavior. It can be very damaging. 5 minutes. Okay, I always do this. Sexting. These numbers on sexting, and sexting is sending sexually explicit messages or nude or partially nude pictures over text message or by other electronic means. And numbers vary widely, again, based on surveys. But I'll tell you, when I talked to that middle school a couple of weeks ago, it's going on there. We dealt with a problem where we had it in one of the middle schools last year. Young girl had sent a picture to her boyfriend for whatever reason, and it got out into the school. And there's a good resource that's put out by MTV. It's called A Thin Line that looks at issues of sexting. We won't go into crime statistics, but what I will tell you is we usually talk about kids, but we also need to be educating our senior citizens. They are disproportionately affected by cyber crime. There's fewer of them online, but they're still getting to be victims. How'd that happen? Can you set that back? Talk about viruses. There's a new thing out called virus toolkits where hackers are actually selling this code to people who want to be hackers. So we can expect that to continue. So that's what we want to do, right? Throw it in the trash can. We'll get rid of that. Well, that's not really a solution. Even if we throw our computer in the trash can, kid next door's got one, there's one at the school, there's one at the library. I won't skip through the slides. Let's get to the bottom line here. There's no technical solution for taking care of all these problems. It comes down to integrity, and it comes down to educating the children and the adults on what the dangers are and what the appropriate behaviors are. And we will never, ever, ever write enough rules to keep people safe. What we have to do is we have to change behaviors, and we have to talk about integrity. And is your online life, does it reflect what your in-flesh life is? If you profess to be a Christian, is that the message that you're sending to the world? And these behaviors aren't appropriate in real life, talking bad about people or bullying them or nude pictures. They're not okay online. Because we tend to draw a distinction sometimes between online and offline when the younger generations don't draw that distinction. Because virtual is real for them. Online is real. I apologize for running and not having time for questions. We may still have a minute, but we do have another session tomorrow afternoon where we're going to talk about some more specific things with cyber safety, things we can do, some resources, some strategies. Again, I would just encourage you to take this message back to the populations that you deal with and don't let them ignore it, because it can be a big deal for all of us, whether it's safety for kids or in our own personal relationships with God. These kinds of things can really get in the way. So thank you very much.